Hi kids, ready for another chapter of the I Survived the Great Chicago Fires? When we last read together, Oscar's mother and Mr. Morrow had gotten married and they all had moved to Chicago. And while they were in the train station, a little orphan girl had stolen their luggage, including the star, the sheriff's star that was Oscar's favorite memento, which is a memory, something that you hold in your hand that makes you remember someone. And they were going to a very fancy dinner in a fancy restaurant. And as they were getting ready to walk into the restaurant, Oscar saw her. And off he ran before he realized that he was off and running. So let's find out what's going to happen in chapters 5 and 6 tonight. It's fun to be back with you. So it's now 10:15 at night. Oscar dodged the speeding horse wagon and leaped onto a steaming pile of manure. He hopped up onto the wooden sideboard and wove his way through the crowd, his eyes glued to the yellow cap bobbing in front of him. The girl didn't look like much of a criminal, with her stick legs and flappy braids, but wasn't that innocent look part of her act? Papa always said that Earless was a charmer. Earless dazzled you with his smile, then he'd shoot you dead, Papa would say. Plus, Papa explained, Earless treated the guys in his gang like brothers. He made sure they ate and drank like kings. Oscar figured the girl was heading for the gang's hideout. His best bet was to secretly follow her there. Oscar stayed hidden as he followed her through the busy streets. They crossed behind the tavern and then cut through a snaking alley. They finally came out into a dark street of small houses and shacks. The girl belined with a sagging little house set back from the street. Excuse me. Oscar ducked behind a barrel and waited as she used a key to open the front door. Bruno, she called as she went inside. I'm back. Bruno. That must be one of the thugs, Oscar thought. He saw a piece of jagged wood laying on the ground. He grabbed it. It would make a decent weapon just in case. He crept up to the house, crouching low so none of the criminals would spot him out the window. He wondered what he should do. Barge in? Demand his suitcases? Suddenly his knees started to shake. Sweat oozed down his neck. What was he doing? He needed to get out of here. But then he thought of Papa facing the gun barrel of Earless Max Kildare. No, Oscar thought, he wasn't going to run scared from a bunch of street thugs. He was going to get Papa's badge back. He curled his fingers around his weapon as he rose up, ready for a fight. Oscar peered through the window. He spotted the little thief, and his mouth dropped open in shock. No, he thought, that can't be. He had imagined her sitting there with Otis Weber and the other boys rummaging through a pile of loot. He'd gotten it wrong. There were no thugs and no sign of his suitcases. The girl sat in a little wooden chair. On her lap was not a pile of stolen money and jewels, but a smiling little boy with a mop of dark curls. Oscar guessed that he was maybe 3 years old. Their voices floated through the open window. Sorry I've been leaving you alone again, she said. I'm very brave, Jenny, the little boy said, puffing out his chest. His little croaking voice made Oscar think of baby frogs he used to catch behind the house. Next time, I help. No, the girl said, it's no fun what I do, and you need to stay home and guard our house. The boy puffed out his chest and said, I guard. And guess what? I have enough money to get us some nice fresh milk tomorrow, the girl said. And a cookie? The boy asked hopefully. We'll see, she said, taking off her yellow cap. She suddenly looked older than Oscar had first thought, maybe 9 or 10. The boy reached up and tenderly soothed one of the girl's crooked braids. I love cookies, Jenny, he whispered. I know you do, Bruni, Jenny said. She smiled. It was a weary kind of smile, tinged with sadness. It reminded Oscar of Mama's smile, how she looked in the months before Mr. Morrow appeared. Oscar swallowed hard as he stepped away from the window. These kids were on their own. He felt it in his bones. He remembered what the policeman had said. Otis Weber preying on the most helpless orphans. Oscar dropped his stupid weapon and headed slowly toward the road. What a dope he was, pretending he was like Papa, chasing a killer outlaw through Chicago. Instead, he'd found two sad little kids, and now all he could think of was Mama. How could he have left her like that? She must be going crazy with worry. His mind was so jumbled up that he barely noticed that something landed on top of his head. It felt like a leaf or a moth. He absent-mindedly brushed it away, then was startled when a shower of sparks spilled down in front of his face. A few hit his skin, burning his flesh like red-hot needles. Oscar looked up and saw a sight so strange he was sure his eyes were playing tricks. It looked as if glowing red snowflakes were falling from the sky. They danced in the gusty wind, hundreds of burning embers of different sizes and shapes. Before he knew what was happening, they were all around him, attacking like a swarm of fiery bees. They seared his scalp, burning through the wool of his clothes, scorching his lips. Pain lashed him, and the sickening smell of burning hair made him gag. And suddenly, whoosh! Faint flames leaped out in front of Oscar's face. The sparks had ignited his clothes. Oscar was on fire. Chapter 6. So did you catch that? A little girl who is only 7 or 8 is staying with a baby who's 3, and she's the oldest. The little girl's 9 or 10. Those are 2 very young little children to be alone by themselves, huh? Very scary, and now a fire has broken out. Remember the name of the story. I survived the Great Chicago Fire. And remember I told you 1/3 of all the houses in Chicago burned down during this fire. Chapter 6. Oscar threw himself on the ground and rolled in the dirt, frantically beating the flames that were crawling up his arms and reaching out to grab his face. He rolled and pounded until finally the burning stopped. He lay there, coughing and spitting out the ashes that coated his tongue. His heart hammered with fear, but he couldn't just lie there. The sparks were still everywhere. The sparks were everywhere. He had to find somewhere to hide. Gritting his teeth in pain, he managed to crawl back into the old chicken coop behind the kid's house. The wood was mostly rotten away, but the roof was just wide enough to protect Oscar. He sat hugging his knees to his chest, swatting away the sparks that came too close. He breathed deep, trying to slow his hammering heart. He touched his forehead, rubbing gently his fingertips over his blistering skin. His scalp was so badly singed, and there were burns up and down his body. But he barely felt the throbbing pain. His attention was focused at the sky. That glow Mama had mentioned earlier that was brighter now. It looked as though the giant hand had painted a bright orange sky. The fire had gotten bigger, much bigger. That's where the sparks and embers were coming from. The powerful winds had scattered them like burning dandelion seeds. The same thing had happened the night of the forest fire near Castle. Sparks and hunks of burning wood and bark had flown for miles, setting off new fires wherever they landed. Mama and Papa and Oscar had almost lost their barn. Some people lost everything: barn, houses, and even fields. 10 people had been killed. One family survived by diving into their pond and dunking under the water when the flames roared over them. Oscar took a breath, trying to loosen the choking fear that gripped his throat. He thought about what Mr. Morrow had said. Chicago had one of the best fire departments in America. Maybe that was true, but there was no sign of them here. And once a fire got too big, not even an army of firefighters could put it out. Oscar learned for himself during the Castle Fire how a fire could grow and grow and grow, how it could become like a ferocious beast that could devour everything in its path. And what a fire was more hungry for than anything was wood, like thousands of shacks and stores that lined Chicago streets, the miles of wooden walkways and warehouses filled with coal and oil that would explode at the slightest spark. Oscar remembered how the forest looked after the fire. He and Papa had ridden up there to see it for himself. Oscar would never forget the sight. The fire had turned thousands of trees into twisted black stubs. The ground was a sea of ash, and there was not a bird, not an insect, not to be seen. Oscar had tried not to look at the blackened bones that were scattered all around, the skeletons of the creatures that hadn't been able to escape. He and Papa both loved the forest. They'd go up there with Mama. He loved telling them the names of every last tree and flower. Oscar and Papa had both brought back tears as they stood on the burning ruins. But then Papa had pointed at something on the ground, a tiny green shoot pushing up through the ash. It will take a long time, Papa had said, but one day the forest will grow back. Oscar shivered as he thought of what that huge fire looked like when it would come to a city like Chicago. Could such an important city burn to the ground? Didn't seem possible. But hadn't Oscar learned that anything was possible? If a blizzard could kill his papa, couldn't a fire destroy an entire city? Oscar looked around as though answers might be painted in the orange sky. But instead, his eyes found the two small and terrifying faces peering down at him from the upstairs window of the house, Jenny and Bruno. The sight of them lit up in the glowing sky jolted him. Right at that second, the wind blew its dragon breath. More spikes and embers appeared, and out of nowhere, a large plank of flaming wood came soaring through the air. It was like an enormous flaming spear hurling by an invisible warrior. It was headed right for the house. Boom! The wood smashed through the roof of the house, sending a column of flames higher into the air. Oscar opened his mouth, but he was too horrified to even scream. What will happen next? See you next time, kids. Good night. Bye-bye.